Okay, I am going to give you a brief introductory video into learning React. And so React is a very popular front-end JavaScript framework right now. I won't go too far into it right now because you're going to get to see it. But here's what we're going to build. We're going to build just a simple to-do list. I can change whether or not the to-do is done. I can add a new one, say, mop the floor, and then there it is, and so it's added. So we're going to build that. I like to kind of show the finished product first, so that if you want to then pause it and try to build it yourself, if you know a little bit of React, now's your chance to pause the video, and then you can check out the solution afterwards. All right. Cool. So I'm going to start it totally from nothing. So if you have Create React App installed, then it's going to be really easy to get up and running. All you have to do is say Create React App and then whatever you want the app to be called. So I'm going to call it To-Do List. While that's installing, I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you the wireframe that I made. So I like to, before I start building a React project, I like to kind of plan out what the component structure will be. And so this kind of gives you like a big picture overview. So you're going to have your app component, which is like the most parent component there is. And then inside of that, you're going to have direct descendants of the app component will be the form component and then the list component. And then descendants of the list component will be these task components. So that's what it's going to look like. That's the kind of the wireframe. This takes a couple minutes to get create React App up and running. But if the alternative is to install Babel and Webpack and all those things yourself, this is much faster doing Create React App. If you have Node installed and npm going, you can just say npm install Create React App -g, and then you'll have Create React App installed, and then you'll be ready to get some React apps going. So this is almost done, and then I'll show you how to do it. Let me go ahead and shut off this other one. Close this out. Feel free to fast forward. This takes maybe just one minute or so usually if your computer is pretty fast. All right, and there we go. So now we got a cd into that directory. All right, now all you have to do, say npm start, and then it comes with kind of a it's already set up for you, and there's some stuff in here that that they already give you, kind of like a landing page of sorts. It takes just a second to kind of get the server up and running. Cool. All right, so there we go. So that's what it looks like whenever you start a new app with Create React App. So the first thing that I like to do is kind of restructure just a couple of things. So one thing that's really cool about using Create React App is they give you the standard of kind of how the app should be structured. And so in this source folder, you've got your app.js file. This is that app component. All right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this logo, and I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this stuff inside of there. We're not going to need any of that. So now when I go back, I've got just a blank screen. Whenever you save the text editor, your browser automatically refreshes. All right, cool. So now what we're going to do is like I said, I'm going to restructure this. I'm just going to create a folder called components. This is where all my components are going to go. I'm going to go ahead and move this into the components folder. That's going to break the app, right? So what we need to do now is we've got to, in our index.js file, this is where the app is rendered. We need to say import app from /component. So we're going into that folder and then getting app.js. And then the other thing is that in this app.js file, now we've got to import the CSS. Well, we're not really even using anything from it right now. We just need to go up a directory and grab the CSS. Now it should be fixed, and there you go. Cool. All right, so here's what we're going to do next. We're going to go ahead and, as we know, we've got the next two sibling or child components are form and list. So I'm going to go ahead and make those. So I'm going to say import form from form and import list from list. So this is of course going to break the app because it can't find those things. So I'm going to go ahead and create a form component, and the basic way to get set up is, if I can spell, it's been a long day. So this is kind of the way that I usually get my components set up. So you're creating a class and then you're extending a component off of the React library. And then oftentimes you can have a constructor method right here. And it would look something like this, and then you can initialize your state, you can do all that. But you actually don't even really have to use a constructor anymore. You can just say state, and then you're good to go, and you've got your state ready. So that's the approach I'm going to take. I am not an expert with React. I don't claim to be. This is just the way that I do it. You might have a better way of doing it, but this is the way that I do it, so I'm gonna show you that way. So let's just first get some stuff on the page. So the render method, that's where our actual displayed JSX is going to be. So we're going to do this. I like to give all of these a class of the name of the component. Notice I'm using class name. The reason for that is that class is a keyword in JavaScript, and so you're not allowed to use that like you would maybe in an HTML document. So class name is form, and then we're just going to call it form component. Now we've got to do the same thing for our list component, because you remember we're trying to import a list as well. So we're going to say list.js import React component from React. I like to just go ahead and export it right from the beginning, just so I don't forget. Class list extends component, and then we're not even gonna set a state right now. We're just gonna go straight into rendering. And list component. All right, cool. So now we're not going to see anything just yet. We're going to see just a white screen. So we've got to actually put these two components in. And so that looks just like this, right? So I'm importing them from /form, right? So it's grabbing this file from its current directory. And then now it can pass it in, right? So now we see form component, list component. Cool. All right. So let's mess with this form component a little bit. We're going to make it a form, right? So let's go ahead and get that happening. All right. So we're just going to have an input, right? And so now we've got this input. We can type. That's cool, right? Okay. So what we need to do, instead of just having an input that doesn't really have any functionality, what we're going to do is we're going to give it a value. And so that might look something like this. We're going to say value equals hello world. All right, I like to bump these attributes down because sometimes your JSX tags can get pretty filled with different attributes, so it's a little bit easier to read if you stack them. All right, so now I would expect that this is going to say hello world. And now, when I type here, nothing happens. That's because I am explicitly saying this is the value of the input, and I'm not allowing a way for that value to change. All right. So typically, what you want to do is you want to actually not hard code your value, but instead put it in your state. And so we're going to call it input value, And then let's go ahead and say hello world here. Okay. Now, right here, instead of hello world, we're going to say, we got to put it in curly braces. Anytime you are going to write JavaScript inside this return, it's got to be wrapped in curly braces. So this, that gets it outside of this render function, dot state, so now we're accessing state, and now dot input value. And now I would expect that it's still going to say hello world, and it does. If I changed it to hello Bob, now that's going to change to hello Bob, right? So it's getting its information from this state. All right, cool. So now we've got to figure out how are we going to change the value, right? So there is a common attribute to use called onChange. It's a synthetic event. And so I'm just going to say console log changed. Let's just make sure that this is actually working. So let me open up my console, and cool. So it doesn't like, let's see, you provided a value prop to a form field without an onChange handler. Okay, cool. So typically you don't actually write the function right inside of here. So I'm going to actually take this out, and I'm just going to say this dot handle change. That's where I was going to head. So I'll go ahead there now. So handle change, and now let me go ahead and console log changed. So now I would expect this error to go away, and then as I type, I'm going to see that show up in the console, right? So now I'm typing. Notice the value is not changing, but that function is firing, right? So we can see that there. So now, here's what we need to do. We've got to pass in somehow the value of input into here, right? It's not really the value of the input, it's the value of the event of you typing, if that makes any sense. So we're going to pass in an event, okay? Now, we're going to pass in the event up here, and I'm going to console log event.target.value. All right, so now I should expect to see, instead of the word changed, the actual letter that I typed. So you can see that there, right? Now, what we've got to do is we have to, with that keystroke, we have to update the value of input value and state. And so the way you do that, you would think you could just go this.state.input value equals, but that doesn't actually work because it doesn't actually change the state, causing the page to re-render. So what you actually have to do, there's a method called setState, and that takes an object, and then what that's going to do is you're going to take input value and set that equal to event.target.value. Now I would expect that whenever I type, I will see whatever I'm typing. And there you have it. Cool? Alright, so now that we know that's working, I'm going to go ahead and make this an empty string. So now this appears empty and we're good to go. Alright, so that's working how we would, for the most part, how we would want it to. We're going to run into some problems later, which I'll address. Alright, cool. So let's put that aside for a second and let's go to our list component. Alright, so our list, as we said, is going to be made up of some task components. And so I'm going to go ahead and import task from /task. And again, that's going to break the app because it's not going to be able to find it. So we're going to go over here and say task.js. You don't have to use the JSX extension anymore. You can just use JS. So now import React component from React. And there, class task extends. Whew. All right. Okay, and we're just going to go straight into rendering. We're not going to do anything with state just yet. And so let's just see if we have this on the page. So div class name task task component. Let's just see if it shows up. It's not going to yet, actually, because we haven't put it in. So instead of list component, we're going to pass in the task. And so I would expect that that's going to update, and there it is. Cool. All right, so that's the task component showing up. So now what we're going to do is in our list component, we're going to initialize state, and we're going to make an array of to-dos. They'll each be an object. We'll say that the value is something like clean the kitchen, and done is false, and we'll make one more, say value is wash the car, and done is true. All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is I want to have a task for each of my to-dos. So what I can, I'm going to take, this is a higher order function called map. If you're not familiar with ES6 or using higher order functions, there are lots of great tutorials out there. So I'm not really going to take the time to go over what map does. I would recommend that you go check it out. So you take this .state.todos.map, and so now I'm accessing this array right here, and I'm mapping over it, and then to do. So now I'm accessing each item of the array, and then I'm going to say return task. So now, since I have two to-dos, I would expect that the task component would show up twice on the page, and it does. There it is. All right, so we've got this warning over here. The warning is that you have to, anytime you map over an array, you have to have a key. And so there's a second parameter you can pass in, which is the index of the array. Now on this, you're going to pass in the index as the key, and that's going to make our error go away. And the reason for that, the reason you have to have that key is the way React works. One of the great things about React is that you've got your DOM, your document object model, and then you have your, with React you have a virtual DOM that kind of sits on top of that. And the reason React is so fast is that anytime something changes, it compares the virtual DOM to the real DOM and just looks for differences, and then it updates only what's different between the virtual DOM and the real DOM, making it really fast. It doesn't have to refresh the whole page or reload the whole DOM. That's one of the reasons React is awesome. So without this key, if it had an array, the virtual DOM wouldn't know which part of the array, which item of the array to look for. And so that's why we have to give it a key anytime you're mapping through an array. All right, cool. So now what I want to do is I'm going to pass in the to-do. So I'm going to say to-do, to-do. All right, so that seems a little bit redundant, right? This right here is referencing the to-do of the current iteration over the array, right? So the first time through it's referencing this, the second time through the map it's referencing this, right? So this word right here, since we're passing it into our task component, we actually are going to have access to it here. And so I can say, instead of task component, I can say this.props.todo. So now I'm accessing that whole object. I can say .value, and so now I should expect to see clean the kitchen and wash the car show up on the page. And there it is. Cool. All right, so we're getting somewhere. So now I'm going to go ahead and wrap this in a span. That's not really going to make it look that much different at all, right? It doesn't look different. But now I'm going to add a button over here, and I'm just going to say click me. All right, cool. So now we've got a button, right? If you click it, nothing happens. Okay, so what we're going to do is, if you remember, we've got this done value. It's a Boolean value of true or false. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first clean this up just a little bit so it's a little bit easier to read. This is gonna kind of mess up this is gonna push the button right up against the text. That's kind of annoying, but it's no big deal. All right, so I'm gonna give this span a style tag or a style attribute. So this first set of curly brackets, that's allowing me to write JavaScript inside of this return statement, and then you have to pass in to the style an object. So that's why I've got this second set of curly brackets. So I'm going to say text decoration. And if you're doing style tags in JavaScript, you have to use camel case because dashes don't work well. You could use a dash if you wrap it in quotes, but this is the normal way to do it. So text decoration equals, let's just say line through. Let's just see what that looks like. So now I should expect that both components have a line through them, and they do. All right, now obviously we only want a line to go through the ones that are done, right? And so what I'm going to do is instead I'm going to use what's called a ternary operator. And so I'm going to say this dot props dot to do dot done. So now I'm saying, is it done, right? If done is true, then pass the line through. Otherwise, if it's not done, text decoration is none. And so now washing the car is done, cleaning the kitchen is not. So that's why this has the line through it. All right, cool. And then I'm going to change this text based on whether or not the to-do is done. And so I can say this.props.todo.done. If it's done, I'm going to give you the option to undo it. And then if it's not done, we'll say complete. So now as it updates, cool. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Still nothing happens when I click these buttons though, right? But we're getting close. We're almost there. So this is just about ready to go, right? So if you think back to our structure, we have our form component and our list component. We need a way to take the value of the input in the form component and then add it to our to-dos. The problem is state, like properties, can only be passed down to their children. And so we have to take this value of the input, lift it up into the app component, and then go into the list component. And so the best way to do that is we're going to do some refactoring, get our input state, our input value up into the app component, and get our to-dos up into the app component as well. All right, so I'm going to show you how to kind of refactor this just a little bit. So let's start with the form first. All right, so I'm going to just copy and paste this state. So taking that out of form and moving it into my app component. So that looks like that, and I've got this. That's going to kind of break the app for just a second because now I have to pass in the input value into my form. And so I'm going to say input value equals this.state.input value. And now inside my form, I have access to it with this.props.input value. So now I would expect that if I came in here and put some value in, it shows up. So I know it's getting passed in, right? Okay, cool. So this change function, this handle change function is no longer going to work as expected because it's trying to change the state of this component. So that's not going to work. So we've got to also get this function into the parent component. So that's there, and now we've got to pass in this handle change function into form. So we're going to say handle change equals this.handleChange, and now handle change equals this.props.handleChange. Okay, so I'm sorry, we don't need that. On change this.props.handleChange. Okay, so now I would expect that that's actually going to work now as I start typing. Cool. Okay, so I can type and it works. Now that we know that's working, let me go ahead and reset this to an empty string. Now we've got to do the same with our to-dos. We've got to get these to-dos into our state of the app component. So now we've got it there in that object. And now we've got to pass these to-dos into the list component. And so that's going to look something like this. To-dos equals this.state.to-dos. And now inside the list, I have access to it by going this.props. Sorry, not there. Right here, this.props.todos. So now I'm mapping over the array that's being passed in. So this word right here, to-dos, that is referencing this word. Okay, this is the property name that's being passed in. So I would expect that that would still work, and it does. So those to-dos are still showing up. If I were to say this.state.todos right here, it would not work if that read state. All right, cool. So now I'm not using this state at all. Let me go and delete it. So now what we have to do, the last step, is to be able to, well, we've got two more steps. One, we've got to be able to take the input that's in here and add it to a new to-do. And then we also need to be able to click this button and change whether or not the to-do is done. Okay, so first let's tackle the input. All right, so I've got this onChange function, and I've got this form right here. A form has a synthetic event called onSubmit. So I can say onSubmit equals, we know that we're going to pass in the input from the app, or sorry, pass in the function from the app component. So I'm going to go ahead and know that and say this.props.submit. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and call it onSubmit. I like keeping the names the same whenever possible. Okay, now I am going to need the event. I'm going to go ahead and pass that in. I'll show you in a minute why we need to pass in the event. So I'm passing in this.props.onSubmit, which means I need to have something called onSubmit here. I'm going to set that equal to this.onSubmit, which means, actually I'm going to call it handle submit. That's kind of a good way to, I've seen it to be like a pretty common approach, calling handle whatever the event name is. So I'm going to go ahead and call this handle submit as well, just to be consistent, which means I've got to change this to this.props.handle submit. This still has to be on submit because that's the actual synthetic event associated with this element, with this JSX element. Okay, cool. So now I would expect that I could say console log submit fired. Okay, you would think everything's going to work great, and we're probably only going to see it for just a second. You may have seen it. It was there for just a few milliseconds. The reason is that by default, whenever you submit a form, the browser refreshes. If you watch this icon right up here in the upper left, as soon as I submit the form, you see a page refresh, right? So that's bad. We don't want that. So what we can do, the reason that we passed in event is now we can say event.preventDefault. So that's a method that is on the event, and that's going to keep the page from re-rendering. There we go, submit fired, the page never re-rendered. All right, cool. So now we need to add the to-do, right? So we have in our state this input value, right? And essentially what we need to do is we need to make a new object that has this value and store it to a key called value. And then we're going to go ahead and give it a key of done with the value of false. It wouldn't make sense for you to create a to-do that's already done, right? So we're just going to assume anytime you're adding a to-do, it's not going to be done yet. All right, cool. So we're going to say const new to do equals an object. The value is this dot state dot input value, and done equals false. Okay? It's not going to do anything yet because now we have to actually add it to our array of to-dos. And so the way we need to do that is first we need to sort of make a copy of the to-dos. Technically, we're not making a copy of the to-dos right now because this is an array, and an array is something that you pass by reference, and so really we're still referencing the exact same array. That might be a little bit over your head right now if you're new to JavaScript, but for the sake of keeping things simple, we're going to just say I'm making a new copy. All right, so now I've copied this array, so now this to-dos is equal to this. And I'm going to say to-dos dot push, so I'm adding a new item to this array, and new to-do, so I'm passing in this newly created object. That's still not going to do it for us, right? If we do that, that happened, we can't see it, but that actually did create that new object and push it to the array. However, we forgot to call setState. So now we're going to say this dot setState, and then we're going to pass in an object, and we're going to say to-dos, because now we're referencing this key, and the value is our new array of to-dos. So we can say to-dos, to-dos, right? And so now I would expect that this is going to work. So I'm going to say mow the yard. And there it is. Cool. So now we also need to clear our input value. That's not a very good user experience to add the to-do, but then it still says mow the yard up there in the input. Before I do that, one quick thing. This is a cool feature about ES6, I think is when it started getting introduced, is if the key and the value have the same name, you can just do that, and it's still going to work the same. And so now, once this refreshes, this is taking a minute to refresh. Did I save? Maybe it's not refreshing because technically nothing changed since it has the same result. Yeah, so there you go. So it's still working. Now we need to clear that input value. So whenever we call this .setState, we can also take the input value and set it to an empty string. I like using single quotes usually. I don't know why I use double quotes up there. All right, cool. At least in my JavaScript. Over here, like in my what feels like HTML, I like to use double quotes for the most part, but in JavaScript I use single quotes. I'm just weird. Okay, so now whenever we add something, mow the yard, it added to the list, the page did not refresh, and the input cleared. So we're super close now. All we have to do now is implement changing that Boolean value to mark a to-do as done or incomplete. So the way we're going to do that is on this task over here, on this button, we need to handle that click. And so there's another synthetic event called onClick. That's what I love about this tutorial is you've got like 3 different synthetic events. We've got onClick, onChange, and onSubmit. Those are 3 really popular ones. So onClick, we're going to say this dot. We're going to say this dot props. We know that we're going to pass it in, and then we're just going to say handle click. Okay. So task is being called in the list, right? And so we're going to say handle click, and then we're also going to pass that in from the app because that's where our state is that needs to be changed. So this dot props dot handle click, and now I've got to go up here, and then I'm going to pass in handle click. That'll be this dot handle click. And then I like to alphabetize a lot of my methods here, so that's why you're seeing this particular order. Handle click equals a function, and then I'm just going to say console log button clicked. All right, cool. So let's just see if we're getting that showing up. Cool. All right, so we're in business. Okay, so we're going to use that information to change this value. Now, one key piece of information that we need is the index of the array. So we need to pass that up this chain, right? So I need to right here pass in the value of the index. So I'm going to say, I don't have it readily available right now. So I need to somehow create it. So I'm just going to say this.props.index, knowing that I've got to make something called index on the task, right? And so I'm going to say index, and this index right here starts at 0, just like when it does when you're counting arrays. So I can just pass in index. You would think that I could just pass in the key, but you're actually not allowed to pass in key as the property. That is exclusive to React. It's its way of handling the virtual DOM. So you can't use this.props.key. That's not going to work. It's going to break the app. So it's got to be this.props.index, and I'm taking that index, passing it in here. All right, so now I'm passing that in. So if I go up here, I would expect that if I pass in the index on handle click and then pass an index there, I would expect that if I click this first button, it should say 0 and 1. There we go. So we're in good shape. All right, cool. So now we've got to take that index and do something with it, right? So we're going to make another copy of this array. So const todos equals this.state.todos. And then we're going to say todos index. So we've got that index that we passed into the click. Then we're going to say .done, right? So now we've got to flip the value. If it's false, we want it to be true. If it's true, we want it to be false. We could make this some like big if-else statement. It's like if it equals true, then it equals false. If it equals false, it equals true. We actually don't need to do that. A really simple solution is just to say bang or exclamation point todos index dot done. And so that's going to flip the Boolean value. Okay, now that's not going to do anything just for us just yet, because we actually still need to set the state, right? And so we're going to say this dot set state todos. And I would expect that this is going to work for us. I'm going to go and delete this console log while I'm here. And I think this is going to do it. Let's see. Awesome, look at that. The value of the button changed. That's changing, and I can add something else. Mow the yard, enter, and look at that. Cool. There you go. And then once it's all ready to go, you could just delete these to-dos here. Now you've got this empty array. Refresh. Got this blank to-do list. I'm going to add something. Clean the kitchen. There you go. Now it's done. You get the idea. Awesome. Cool. Hope that was very informative for you. And I plan to put out a few more React videos in the future. Thanks for watching.